Hi everyone, this is Gunbir, analyst at Stone. My preferred pronouns. Congratulations on winning so far. Best of luck.
Hi guys, Shaunak. I go by Hide. Congrats on making it to Novice Finals and all the best.
Hello, Tejas. Good luck to everyone.
Also, like general housekeeping rules apply, do engage in terms of POIs as well. This being said, PM, whenever you're ready, the floor is yours. Here.
Hello, hello. Am I audible? All right. Before I start, hello everyone. Neatly going as PM. Prefer pronounce she, her. Preferred QR timings post the fourth minute, only by details of hands. Kindly do not badger. With that, starting my speech on a reversal countdown on three, two, and one. And then here are going to be the structure of my speech. First of all, a few definitions, characterization, and then constructors, right? Definition. What are the American private sector? They refer specifically to the businesses, corporation, and industries owned and operated privately in the US, not government-run sectors. Here, we mainly focus on giant companies like Amazon, Disney, Google, Meta, etc., etc., which means that all of these organizations have a monopoly on their specific sector. To put that into sight, Amazon has a monopoly on e-commerce, Meta on social media and stuff like that, and Disney on the entertainment industry. Now, what does the current status quo look like? The monopolies and the near monopolies dominate key sectors, severely limiting both the consumer choice as well as the market innovation. As long as this is true, when a company becomes too large, it does not face real competition. What does it look like? It has no serious pressure to offer better products, lower prices, or new ideas. So instead of innovating, the dominant firms often prioritize maintaining their control. What does this look like? Take into consideration Amazon, right? Its dominance in online retail allows it to push out smaller sellers by undercutting them on price, controlling search rankings, and charging high fees for platform visibility. As a result, what happens? The consumers increasingly find themselves buying from fewer sources, even if better or more ethical alternative exists. Similarly, the Disney's acquisition of Marvel, Pixar, Lucasfilm, and the 20th Century Fox means that a huge proportion of the mainstream movies, shows, and streaming content now comes from a single creative pipeline. And I understand that innovation is stifled, which means that this result is less diversity in storytelling, more formulaic content, and repetitive and over repetitive content for the consumers as well. So what does it essentially lead to? It leads to stagnation, which means that the rich keep getting richer and the poor keep getting poorer simply because poor do not have the vision to actually come out and do something, solely because such a competitive firm already exists in the market, which means that people are not able to venture into these firms. As long as that is true, the startups go to trash, right? So when monopolies buy out smaller innovative companies or control entire production chains, they just stifle disruptive technologies before they can threaten the status quo. So, for example, when Facebook got Instagram and WhatsApp early in their lifespan, it neutralized potential competitors that might have otherwise revolutionized the social media space differently, right? What was the result? The users are trapped inside a few ecosystems with little meaningful alternative. Thus, the current system leads to stagnation, high barriers for new entrants, poorer consumer experience, and innovation slowdown. So, how do we solve it? We solve it by simply introducing aggressive deconsolidation. But before that, what is deconsolidation? It means breaking apart large companies that have accumulated too much control, market share, or influence into smaller units. Before that, your POI.
Yeah, so how does this kind of address the basic overreach that government would have onto companies' freedoms to like engage in trade and react to market forces?
All right, I'll get into that. Thank you so much. So, by splitting up these dominant countries, what do we essentially do? We force businesses to compete on merit, and that completely answers your POI. How I'll get into that? So, better products, better services, lower prices, and more diverse offerings are the claim, right? I'll prove it to you how. If Amazon's marketplace was separated from its retail arm, or if Disney were forced to spin off Marvel and Pixar, smaller studios and retailers would have space to grow, which means that they would not have been taken over by this bigger firm, which means it offers consumers more varied choices, different experiences, no over repetition, right? Without this suffocating control of a like mega firm, independent voices could reach wider audiences, which means fresher ideas, greater representation, flourishing creativity, right? So when we prevent these large mergers in if the regulators had stopped Disney from buying Fox, it ensures that companies must innovate rather than survive, which means that creativity just flourishes in our side of the world. So subsidizing smaller competitors, for example, supporting indie marketplaces to challenge Amazon or smaller streaming platforms against Disney Plus helps to rebalance the playing field. So then what does this lead to essentially? This leads to the economic power of monopolies. They often translate directly into political influence. What does this look like, panel? The giant cooperation now can lobby heavily, which means that they fund political campaigns and their influence regulations in their favor, which means that they drown out the voices of the ordinary citizens and the smaller businesses. To put this into perspective, let us take the example of Amazon and Meta. They spend tens of millions annually on lobbying efforts to shape laws that protect their dominance. But if we don't aggressively, deconsolidate these companies, they will continue to entrench a system where these policies serve corporate interests much more than public interest. But why is it that? Because it fundamentally weakens the democratic accountability which are then there on these companies, and there is literally no accountability which exists because these are the sole players who exist in this field. So you literally cannot have any checks on them. So the opposition cannot come and tell us that, oh, we have checks, yada yada. You really don't, right? But then, why is this concentration of political power so bad? Because it undermines the basic principles of democracy. What does it look like? The laws and policies are supposed to reflect the will and welfare of the people, not corporate rights, right? So when monopolies control legislation through lobbying, they create a system where ordinary citizens, small businesses, vulnerable communities, they are sidelined. What does this lead to? It leads to a proper a stagnant economy which does not even delve further. But then, when we introduce the concept of aggressive deconsolidation, it is necessary to break this vicious cycle, right? How do we do that? By reducing the size and influence of individual corporations, we weaken their ability to dominate political processes and restore a more balanced democracy where diverse interests are held and represented. But I mean, what is the major incentive behind us doing this? The major incentive is to increase is to uplift the economy. So let me put into perspective, how is the economy essentially better on our side of the world? So panel, when a few massive corporations dominate critical sectors, the economy becomes dangerously fragile because it is overly dependent on the health and decision of the very few players. To put this into perspective, let's just take the example of COVID-19 pandemic, right? So the Amazon's warehousing and logistic bottlenecks it directly led to widespread supply chain disruptions, which affected not just the consumers but also the small scale businesses that relied on its platform. Oh yes, our stakeholders are the American private sector, the small scale businesses, and as well as the society at large. So then, what does this lead to? So the 2008 financial crisis showed how the collapse of a few too big to fail banks could trigger global economic meltdown. So then, what does this essentially lead to? In a highly consolidated economy, one company's internal failure becomes a national or even global problem because you simply do not have a fallback mechanism. So when you deconsolidate this solves the problem by creating a network of smaller yet competitive firms. So, how is the firms competitive? That will be coming in my DPM speech. When no single company controls too much market share, the system becomes more shock absorbent. What does this look like? Which means that if Amazon or Disney falter, we have a fallback mechanism. What are these fallback mechanisms? The other small scale businesses who can fill the void, who can fill the gap, who can maintain the service continuity, and who can maintain the economic stability. So let us compare a market which is dominated by Amazon to one where multiple regional e-commerce players exist. In the later case, even if one faces disruption, the consumers and sellers are not harmed because they can now quickly switch to alternatives, minimizing the overall impact. This aggressive deconsolidation is critical not just for fairness but for building a structurally safer, more resilient economy that can withstand better economic crisis. And when we have set the foundation for a better economy, it simply means that the development is better on our side of the world flourishes better on our side of the world. And with that, proud to propose. Thank you.
I thank PM for that very fine speech, calling hello to start O's case here.
Yeah, basic introductions again. Somil, he, him, they, them. Before I start, a huge shout out to PDMPA and of course Bald Malhar and Choti Advance. Anyway, beginning my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, understand the entire government claim rests on the one fact that they can prove to you that there are monopolies in every sector, and without these fucking monopolies, and without these companies, these sectors are inherently monopolized with these companies. But you have to understand that is not actually how the status quo works. The PM comes around and tries to explain in approximately 3 to 4 minutes why there is a monopoly in the status quo for every fucking sector. But that is not actually true. In the status quo, no true monopoly actually exists. These are called oligopolies. Now, what does this mean? In this system, what happens is there are larger companies who can come and take over. So there are no actually inherent monopolies. And why do we say so? We say so because if tomorrow fucking Amazon fucks up, right? And if Amazon fucks up in any way, which is like also half of what their claims are. If Amazon fucks up, Alibaba can come in and make sure to like establish their market share. So inherently, it's like there is no actual true monopoly where one company is controlling the entire sector, and no one company is actually like hinging the economy upon itself. Secondly, why free markets work and why are they inherently good? See, when we talk about this motion, the motion is inherently about deconsolidation of these major monopolies. Now, what does deconsolidation exactly mean? Government gives you like an extremely uncharitable case towards the op where they try to explain to you what deconsolidation means. Deconsolidation is inherently breaking apart a company. Now, they easily mention, oh yeah, breaking apart a company, but they don't understand the repercussions that breaking apart a company actually brings. When you break apart a company, you have layered problems in the economy and with multiple stakeholders. Why do we say so? We say so because if you break apart a company, number one, the employees get fired. There's a huge amount of layoff. If the gov wants to actually settle this claim, they have to explain to you why inherently what inherently happens to these employers who are now laid off. Secondly, the economy in general. If you actually break apart this company, the actual economy inherently gets fucked up. And why is that so? Because these major companies, which they call monopolies, but these are just inherently major companies, right? These inherently major companies like Fang or whatever, these are publicly traded companies. These publicly traded companies they have shares in the free market in which venture capitalist firms and even like regular investors invest in. So if they actually take down this entire company, your economy is till a very large extent fucked. And why do we say so? We say so because now you're not adding anything to your GDP. Additionally, when you include this much government intervention into the free market, first of all, this is the gov burden which they have to prove to you that why this government intervention or why the state intervention is inherently good for deconsolidation. They have to prove to you why is this actually good. Why we say it's bad is because when you actually see on the global market, the government's actually penalizing these major companies and major economies for actually being like extremely for holding a significant market share. It's inherently bad because this reduces the trust in the foreign market. So now major companies or like major investors from around the globe will not want to invest in, because they don't actually see any sort of profit. Because whenever they try to invest in, whenever the companies get capital, they expand, they just know that the government's going to come in and inherently fuck up their entire investment, fuck up these companies, and now they will not they'll not get back on whatever they're investing. Secondly, if you actually penalize the rich and these industries too much, because of the amount of capital, because of the goodwill, and because of the amount of global market share they hold, these aren't just monopolies in one state, in one country, which is another like which is something that Gov also misses, that these aren't companies just in one state or one country. These are companies which impact the world as a whole. So now if you start deconsolidation of this company, if you start making this company smaller and probably like not exist, the benefits that it provides around the globe will inherently reduce, and no company in the world will want their profits to reduce. So what will inherently happen? On the gov side, if these companies are inherently penalized, they will probably take their capital somewhere else. Also, like on their side, even if on our side we say that there aren't like absence of regulations, there exist antitrust laws, anti-monopoly laws in the status quo. Mark Zuckerberg has been called into the Senate. Gov's burden is to show why an extreme step like deconsolidation is needed, which cannot be solved otherwise, right? You have to understand that if you actually penalize the rich so much, which are inherently headquartered in in probably the United States or whichever country, and that country starts penalizing these organizations, they are inherently bound to move to another state which do not penalize them that much. And it's not like that this is an extremely uncharitable case towards the gov, because this actually happened when the Indian government started taxing the rich too much. MF Hussain moved from India to Dubai in order to prevent paying as much taxes as he possibly can. Before I move on, POI, yes.
How do you intend to make these other larger companies when these monopolies literally buy out any other small company which even comes close to success?
Perfect. Thank you so much. This will be extended upon my DPM, but I will answer your question here, which is that these smaller companies, no matter whatever product they're providing, there's a reason that they're not big companies. It's because they lack capital, and which is why they get bought out by these companies. These companies inherently are benefiting these smaller companies. And why do we say so? We say so because if a smaller service or a product provider has a certain product, they can't actually reach everywhere. If I have one person in, let's say, Pune, where I live, and they're offering like some insane product, they can only expand so much. They can only expand their market so much. So what these inherent larger companies do is they not only provide them a way to make sure that their product progresses, they inherently also provide these products to the consumers, which is something that the gov also doesn't deal with. You have to understand that the ones getting fucked over here are economy and consumers at large. If you take away the larger product and the extremely great product that this is, they're monopolies because their product is actually that good. If you take away this product from this market, the major people who are going to suffer are the consumers, and there is no actual mitigation on it by government, and the entire government bench cannot inherently refute this. With that, my DPM DLO will extend. Thank you.
Thanking Elo for that very fine speech. Calling DPM to extend OG's case. Here.
Yes, give me 10 seconds. All right, starting my speech on a reverse countdown of 3, 2, 1, start. A very pleasant afternoon to one and all present here. This House supports aggressive deconsolidation of American private sectors, which is the motion that we're debating today, right? First of all, a basic reiteration of whatever the CARAC that was given by the Prime Minister. We tell you how the current world has, great monopolies set up, especially the American private sector, which includes companies like Amazon, Meta, Disney, etc., which is for some reason very stupidly challenged by the yellow, and the yellow asks us to prove that that these monopolies actually exist in the real world, where they actually do exist. Because when you talk about antitrust laws, I believe you don't understand what field you're playing right now, because antitrust laws are nothing. Sorry, deconsolidation is nothing but an implementation or a byproduct of antitrust laws. If an antitrust lawsuit against a company, if a company loses an antitrust lawsuit, the result of that is deconsolidation of that company, right? Again, but moving forward, when you ask me to prove to you that monopolies do exist, that I prove to you that they exist because they actually do exist in status quo, because antitrust lawsuits against companies like Amazon, Meta, etc., do exist, which are currently under process and which are very have severe allegations on these companies, right? So the fact that these antitrust lawsuits exist means that such monopolies exist, because these antitrust lawsuits also do not come into existence out of nowhere. They do not come into existence out of the blue moon. They are built upon fairness. These are built upon federal investigations. They are built upon the complaints made by small businesses because of the amount of or the kind of unjust monopolization or mergers that are taking place in the current economic world, right? But then you also talk about how economy gets fucked up on our side of the world. You also talk about how deconsolidation, also very gross generalization on your side of the world. You tell me that deconsolidation means that the company ceases to exist. No, the company gets divided into smaller parts, and I'll get to why that is a good thing on our side of the world, right? You also talk about how you also, like, in answer to the POI, where where we talk to you about how startups do not get the chance to flourish, or startups do not get enough space in the market to progress as bigger companies. Your simple reply to that is that there's a reason why these companies are not big. Okay, there's a reason why these companies are not big, so you will not even give them the chance to grow. Wow, great solution to that problem. But anyway, moving forward, my previous speaker talked about how deconsolidation takes place from the side of the government, where these companies usually have like kind of a monopoly set up over the land, over the economic spectrum, and they have sort of an unjust power exercise a sort of an unjust power over the economic spectrum, right? But then I'll also talk about how deconsolidation also happens to be good for these American private sector companies that we talk about, because they are our primary stakeholder, right? How is deconsolidation good for these companies? Deconsolidation often is also a strategic move that these companies carry out, right? What happens is that these bigger companies, when they get divided into smaller pieces of, when they get divided into smaller organizations, it means that there is more autonomy over each and every organization, right? Which means that the management that is present for each organization becomes better, right? Which means that if there's more autonomy, there is domain specific management, right? So if say there was a company which was doing both retail as well as say marketing, it gets divided into two parts, where one organization is now just doing retail, the other organization is just doing marketing. Then there is better management for both of these domains, right? The management becomes domain specific. When the management becomes domain specific, there is better management, there is better yield, and there is better innovation, right? But since there is better innovation, there is better yield, which means since there is better yield, it means that there is more money flowing into the since there is more money flowing into the company, right? If there is more money flowing into the company, it means that these companies now have the incentive to, now these companies have enough money to stay afloat, and on top of that, they also have enough money to invest into other things, like becoming better at whatever it is that they're doing, right? So innovation becomes better on our side of the world, right? This happens, and on top of this happens, and which also leads to your also other claim was that economy gets fucked on our side of the world, which actually does not happen, because first of all, the unit-wise organization of these companies, the unit-wise yield of these companies becomes better, which means that the overall yield of the country becomes better. This also means that there is also greater area for more startups to prosper, because now there is more space in the market, right? Since there is more space in the market, there are more startups coming up in the market, which means that there is more job creation in the market, right? Since there is more job creation, there are more startups, there is more money flowing into the system. Since there is more money flowing into the system, it basically means that the economy is prospering. It basically means that there is better economic standing of each and every person. It means that people genuinely have better standards of living, and they have they have better livelihood in general, right? Which also leads to lesser economic polarity, because since now there is no concept of the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, economic disparity is lesser on our side of the world. Political and social disparity also is also lesser on our side of the world because of such things, right? What's your POI before that? First. POI.
I'm sorry, I believe both have given a POI. I'm happy to give you mine.
Yeah.
That you mentioned that monopolies exist because they exist, which seems like inherently circular logic. I was wondering if you could clarify that.
Oh, okay. I'll get to that. I'll tell you how monopolies exist. I provide you a proper mechanization as to how monopolies exist in this world. Monopolies exist because there is an existence of active lawsuits against companies like Amazon and companies like Meta, right? These lawsuits only come into existence when there is an existence of monopoly, when out of proper investigation, federal investigation, as well as genuine complaints from the side of other organizations, it is proven that yes, such monopolies exist, and that is when these lawsuits come into existence. That is when these antitrust lawsuits come into existence, right? Since these lawsuits are in existence, it means that these monopolies exist in the current world, right? Then I also prove to you how now, since we all know that the majority of the world is under comprises underdeveloped countries, right? Underdeveloped countries also happen to be better on our side of the world. How does that happen, right? Majorly, any kind of innovation that takes place in underdeveloped countries is usually stemmed from the innovations that take place in these developed countries, right? We're talking about countries like, the American private sector in general, right? So when I told you how, when I provide you a proper mechanization as to how, when the American private sector or these companies get divided into smaller chunks, they produce better yields, which leads to a better amount of which leads to a larger amount of time being invested in economic and time being invested in technological advancement and technological research, right? When this time that is being invested in technological advancement and technological research is increased, it means that there is a greater chance of better products coming out over there, right? And this happens like a trickle down effect. Panel, I need you to understand that this trickle down effect is how innovations come into existence towards the eastern part of the world in general, right? Some big thing comes out in the West, and most smaller businesses try to retail it off at a cheaper price in our countries, in underdeveloped countries, right? That is how it happens. It's a trickle down effect. It's like a domino effect, right? Which happens to be better on our side of the world, because in general the yield of these bigger companies happen to be better on our side of the world, which means that the amount of development, that technological advancement that takes place in underdeveloped countries also happen to be better on our side of the world, because the majority of the development, I'm not saying all the development or all the innovation, but majority of the innovation that takes place over here is also contingent on the amount of innovation or development that takes place on the western side of the world, right? So since it stems from there, the underdeveloped countries also have a better economy. The world economy in general is better, and that is why I believe we take away this debate. Thank you. Proud to propose.
I thank DPM for that very fine speech. calling DLO to extend O's case. Here, whenever they're ready. DLO.
Just a second. Hi, Arush, he, him, they, them. POS whenever. Uh, Speech will start on my next word. POS verbalize, please. Panel understand that we probably care about stability, innovation, consumer welfare, whatever, right? Cool. Fair enough. I think then their first argument about like how, why if like Amazon fucks up, there's not going to be any alternative. I don't really understand, right? TikTok has Instagram Reels as a competitor. Shopify and Amazon exist. Netflix, Prime Video, etc. exist. I don't understand how their arguments over here work, right? Free markets probably correct themselves naturally, right? Monopolies are inherently fragile if they fail to innovate because then consumers don't buy into their products, right? If Amazon fucks up, then that leaves a lot of room for Shopify to just go in and innovate and give cheaper prices, more innovation, etc., right? Monopolies are inherently fragile if they fail to innovate. MySpace closed down without deconsolidation. Napster failed because they did not have a lot of innovation, right? Fair enough. Napster failed and was taken up by Spotify, even though Napster was like absolutely used, and at that point probably considered a monopoly, right? Fair enough. I think then mergers probably help innovation a lot, right? Big firms acquire smaller ones, and economies of scale then work out, and you're able to invest a lot more money into R&D, etc. Fine. I think then you probably understand that all this drives innovation on our side is paradigm. Fine. I think then when you have like forced breakups of certain companies, you probably kill R&D ecosystems altogether because R&D works in consolidation with all other systems, right? Fair enough. I think like aggressively deconsolidate I think then when you tell me that you're going to create competition, I don't understand why that works too much, because deconsolidation inherently fragments markets, right? When you have like 20 different suppliers, there is inherently less demand, right? When you have less demand, production costs rise and prices rise, right? If there are 20 different suppliers, if there are 20 different sellers, production costs will rise for each and every one, and prices will rise for the consumers, right? Logistics then inherently collapse because of the fall down of vertical integration, right? You no longer have next day delivery by Amazon. You probably have like week-long shipping because now there is no longer any vertical integration with the suppliers, with the manufacturers, etc. Amazon no longer has warehouses. Consumers don't really give a shit about like infinitesimally small options. They want like actual reliable access to goods, etc. Right? Fine. Even consumers are probably like by and large the most impacted people here. Even then, employees are probably far better off because when you have a bunch of companies that are selling at high prices, demand is inherently low, which means there's less money to pay your employees with, right? Fine. Vertical integration then probably inherently leads to consumer welfare. Consumers are definitively worse off on gov-sided paradigm. There is no way for them to prove otherwise. Fine. I think then on the point of economic fragility, understand panel that economic fragility at this scale to shock something like Amazon only happens when there is an absolute large-scale governmental, political, social collapse, right? Example, the COVID-19 pandemic that they gave me, right? Large firms are inherently able to manage crises better because they are so big, they have resources to survive disruptions, right? Amazon can invest billions in COVID logistics, right? On the other hand, when you have 20 different like small firms, on the other hand, when you have 20 different small firms, what happens is not that one of those firms fall and then you have 19 other options. What happens is when there is even the tiniest bit of like societal fracture, all 20 of those firms are fucked because none of them have like the economic capital to survive any fractures, right? Fair enough. Then when centralized logistics hub happens, when like centralized logistic hubs like Amazon warehouses exist, you probably save billions and millions of households during COVID simply through employment, right? Fine. I think then O's world probably has like scale on their side. They probably have like absolute mass bankruptcies during crisis. I don't understand how they're able to win on this clash, right? Fair enough. I think then when they come to me about like monopolies capture political power, I think that's a pretty easy argument for us to counter. If politicians are like buying into companies that are like, if politicians are like lobbying for companies and creating policies for companies that don't have public good, don't have the public good at heart, then like the public simply will not vote for the politicians. Like government is inherently populist in nature. Populist appeal to the general public. They want votes, right? Fine. Reform, transparency, laws, etc. already probably exists, right? If you aggressively intervene, populist politicians handpick winners and losers through subsidies that are politically capitalized on their side of paradigm, right? Politicians then support the companies that are fucking horrible, that will never survive in the free market, and they give them money, right? This inevitably leads to like bubbles and crashes and etc., right? Public choice theory over here is pretty simple, right? We probably keep influence manageable and fixable on our side of the paradigm. On their side, you're empowering the politician to be like fucking kings over the economy. Politicians are inherently dumb. They do not know about economies. They're going to support bad actors because of political capital. Take your PYB quick.
So when I tell you that deconsolidation is an impact of antitrust laws, and antitrust laws are only filed against companies which have some sort of malpractice going on in the market, how do you assume that there are no big companies left in the market when only those companies get deconsolidated which have antitrust laws against them? Thank you.
Because there is being a case filed against someone, that company is bad. I do not understand how this line of argumentation really manifests itself. Fine. I think then when you come to me about like monopolies capturing political power, I don't understand why this is the case, because on their side, when you're actively encouraging politicians to act on their own will and on their own intuition, right? I don't think that extreme really works, right? Simple crash summary: consumer prices far better on my side of paradigm, innovation better because you have more money to invest into R&D, job security far better because now simple crash with economy will not fuck over your 20 firms where their people are employed. Political capture worse off, economic stability worse off because now you have a greatly shock absorbent economy, right? Fair enough. I think then just like extending on my PM further, even though most of my rebuttals were just extensions in nature, fine. I think it's pretty simple then. I think it's like fairly simple then to understand like it's fairly simple to understand then that when you penalize these companies, they probably move out of America in the first place, right? This essentially fucks up like 350 million people who actually live in America, and B, it fucks up global economy at large, because when you have like such large scale migration, is probably inherently bad, right? Fine. I think then we have economies of scale, which is probably inherently good on our side of the paradigm. We probably have like a great deal of innovation through consolidation and capital pooling, right? Consolidation inherently leads to bigger R&D budgets because then Google is able to innovate, right? Your acquisition model of like buying. Also, their claims about startups not existing does not really work out too well, because startups are inherently existing, right? Zepto exists, Blinkit exists. So some monopoly like Zepto exists, right? Zepto is a startup. There could have been a monopoly like Swiggy or whatever that could have just taken them over, but Zepto is still incredibly popular because the free market exists. Consumers inherently value the people who can give them the most value, right? Fine. I think then their extreme ways like far too good. Why don't you just have like basic antitrust laws, right? You have to prove that. Fair enough. I think then like cross subsidization also exists on our side of the paradigm. You have like profitable divisions that also fund experimental divisions, right? This looks like AWS profits, that AWS profits go towards AI development for Amazon, right? Comparative here is pretty simple. When government fragments these ecosystems, absolutely no division has the cash flow to fund like risky innovation. There is no innovation on that side of the paradigm. That's a fairly definitive constructive, right? Fair enough. I think that free market self-correction is pretty obvious. Government intervention destroys because governments do not know economy. And then foreign investors are pretty risky. They will not really invest into your country because then they know once you get big enough, you're gonna fucked up. Proud to oppose. Fine.
I thank Diallo for that fine speech. With this, we conclude the opening half. To begin the closing half, I would invite member of COF here.
Yeah, my name is Mithun. I'll be going as member of COF. Just give me a few seconds and I'll begin with the self-conduct. All right, yeah. Fine. Pronouns he, him. POI, raise of hand or drop in chat. If I have time, I'll take it. All right. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. All right, panel. What is this debate supposed to be, and what was not given by the opening half, right? Panel, this debate is supposed to be about the American private sector, right? But what majorly happened in the opening half, they spoke about how monopolies are good or bad, or why deconsolidation right now is generally bad, and they gave examples which are not very US centric, right? Now, panel, why am I bringing this up? Because this debate is fundamentally about the American private sector. Right? What is the American private sector? The American private sector is the engine of global capitalism, right? But you have to understand, America became the face of capitalism because of its commitment to free markets. And today's whatever market nature it will be, monopolistic, oligopolistic, or duopolistic, it is killing the nature of free market, which is what is the face of America, which is what America always stood up to. Now, you have to understand, right? This is inherently threatening America's identity because only few giants control everything. When you think of America, you think of these few corporations. That's inherently bad because America always stood for free markets, and free markets is about choice. Free markets is about options. Free market is about opportunity. But all of these lying with the hands of a few is inherently bad, which is what my opening government also tried to do. Now, what did my opening comment say? Their case was on two things, right? One, innovation, and these innovation being killed, and political lobbying done by these MNCs. Now, panel, what is our extension to this? Panel, before the extension, let me get into one thing, right? You have to understand, American dream was the 9 to 5 before. What is today's American dream, panel? Today's American dream is entrepreneurship, right? But that spirit does exist in America, but that spirit, because of these corporations, big companies existing, this spirit of entrepreneurship is getting killed, right? Yes, every American guy probably wants to build his company, but he's building a company for Amazon to come eat this company up. Either buy him out. If a product is amazing, they either buy him out or they crush him, right? So this monopolistic or duopolistic or oligopolistic, these power centered within few people are inherently killing the spirit of entrepreneurship. Now, panel, let's delve deep into how these kind of markets are inherently bad for free market structure of America, right? Panel, like I mentioned, right, free market is about choice. When there is choice, consumers' utility or consumer satisfaction is upheld. When there is no choice, there is no utility upheld. Opposition will come and tell you, oh, because the market is oligopolistic, you have choice. But you have to understand, panel, this is a fake reality of choice, right? Why do I say this is fake? Because when you think about whether you have a choice, your choice is very limited. Oh, do I scroll Instagram reels or do I scroll YouTube shorts? It's very limited, right? Panel, you need much more than that. Consumer utility lies in choice, the power of choice. And this is also the core of a healthy economy. If a consumer is not given the power of choice, then economy is inherently doing bad, which is why these type of markets are bad for the economy. Now, panel, what are our extensions? Now, opening opposition comes out and tells deconsolidation leads to layoffs, etc. So economy will shamble, employment is really bad, right? Agree. But panel, why do I agree? Because this is a short-term effect. Over the long term, employment is much better off on our side. Why? You have to understand, right? Restructuring large firms now might cause turbulence, but over time, employment is vastly better because there are more players coming into this particular sector, right? If one giant is fallen down, 5 more companies come up to fill up that space. This is much better because economy runs smoothly. It's better for the society because there are more opportunities, right? Mid-sized firms and small market enterprises are much better because they generate more employment. Yes, today it might be bad, but over a long time, it's much better, right? Which why really employment is better off on our side over long term. Yes, we do agree that there is a short-term detrimental effect, but that will appear later. But the long-term effect long-term positive impact outweighs the short-term disadvantages. Now, panel, labor rights are also better off on our side. This is a second extension. Why is labor rights better off on our side? In MNCs, labor rights are not really protected, right? I mean, in big corporations, if it's a big corporation, they usually buy out the labor organizations. But if it is multiple small market enterprises or multiple mid-sized firms, the labor rights are upheld. You can question your employer. You can always stand against inhumane treatment of employers, which can only be done if the power is not centered with these big corporations. Now, panel, let's understand the main thing that I've been talking about, right? Choice and consumer utility. You have to understand, panel, a market which is oligopolistic gives you limited choice, right? Few options, limited choice, and when it comes to products, there is limited quality, right? There's only little responsiveness. But panel, a deconsolidated market, right, improves competition. Competition is the forefront of a free market, which is what will be upheld if we deconsolidate. And then, what does this competition give us to? From when we move from an oligopolistic, duopolistic, or monopolistic market to a perfectly competitive market, what do we get? We get better service. And like my opening comment also, innovation is much better. Correct. Innovation will be better off. There is more customization. There is better service. What does this all lead to the consumer? Right? It only matters because the consumer has a lot of choice. Consumer can choose between what he wants the best. Consumer can see that he has multiple options and utility upheld. Now, panel, this is our major extension, that is choice and utility. Right? Now, why won't choice and utility be maximized when it is a oligopolistic market? Because one, it might give you the notion of having choice, but inherently no choice, not many choices, right? It's very limited choice, but consumers don't want limited choice. Consumer want multiple choices because then they know that they have multiple options to pick to, which is when utility is maximized. Now, panel, why do we talk about aggressive deconsolidation, which is what our opening houses left out, right? Panel, you have to understand deconsolidation aggressively is only possible today, right? In status quo, American economy is the strongest economy, and if we deconsolidate, yes, there will be a detrimental effect on the economy. But panel, America is powerful enough to absorb this shock, right? Why am I telling that this deconsolidation is important? Because now that American absorb the shock, we can become a better, bigger economy by getting more players into the market. Now, why can't we do this later? Finally, you have to understand. Previously, we already got an economic shock via pandemic. What is the future shock that is coming? That is the AI revolution, panel. To beat this revolution, to get ahead of everyone, we need to deconsolidate the market now. Why am I telling this, panel? Because if we do not deconsolidate, we see other competitions. For example, China, right? They are flushing too many people. They are probably taking over the AI revolution. That is not what we want. We want America to be at the top all the time, right? Now, which is why I'm telling you, deconsolidation is only possible now, and it is necessary for America's future because the current American economy is resilient, is powerful, is shock absorbent, and this shock absorbent by this deconsolidation can only happen now. All right. Any Right, yeah, panel. Summarizing, okay, these are extensions. One, choice and utility is better off on our side. Deconsolidation is important now because later it will just lead to other countries taking over you. That's our second extension. Third, labor rights and employment is much better off on our side. Now, panel, what are the benefits that the government offers? If you go ahead with whatever is happening in status quo, all the benefits are only limited to these particular corporations. Only big companies get the benefits. But our side, society is better off because you have more players, more employment, labor rights is better. Economy is better because more players are coming in, more taxpayers, more money is circulated. So GDP will also be better off. These are the benefits that we give you, and our benefits outweigh the benefits of the side opposition, which is why we take this debate. Thank you so much.
Thanking MG for that really fine speech. Calling member of OP to begin CO case. Here.
Yes, hello. Here I'm sharing a laptop with my partner, and just to let you know, I will put POIs by the chat. I'm watching them, so there'll be no issue there. Otherwise, I'll be good to go in a 1, a 2, and a 3. So, a world where American innovation withers as fragmented companies lack resources for breakthrough research, a world where workers lose stable, high-paying jobs as consolidated firms are dismantled, where consumers pay more for inferior products while Chinese megacorporations dominate global markets. That is the world government builds today with their aggressive deconsolidation proposal. We set a very different vision where American firms can be scaled to compete globally, workers enjoy the higher wages, and where consumers benefit from the integrated experiences and continuous innovation that only scale enables. So first, we'd like to start off by actually looking at what a business is. It's not actually a monolithic entity that just kind of acts in its own way. It is a very kind of people-driven thing that consists primarily of 3 groups of people that we'd like to look at: workers, executives, and consumers. So workers, fundamentally, what do they want? Economic security, career advancement, meaningful work. And why do a consolidated business provide this? Workers earn higher wage in consolidated firms because there's greater productivity per worker through economies of scale. This is very basic. If you have these greater, essentially, economies of scale, you can afford to pay workers more because they effectively produce more, which allows the company to pay them more. Also, during downtimes, consolidated firms with diversified revenue streams can actually maintain employment instead of just immediately laying off people. Consolidated firms also have internal labor markets, which means you can advance internally in a company. So as a worker, I can actually gain greater opportunities without having to leave the company. Consolidated firms also will enable employees to work on transformative products. A researcher at Pfizer can actually create medication saving millions of lives, which means if they went into medical research, they probably want to do that, which makes them happier. Executives, what do they want? They want compensation security. They want predictable, substantial compensation that consolidated firms can provide. In fragmented industries, executive compensation fluctuates dramatically with market conditions. Consolidated firms offer stable, higher compensation packages. This is why executives are more interested in working here. Reputation, executives seek to shape industry standards, policy. This consolidated firms allows them to do this because they have their influence aligns with broader societal interests. Because these companies' long-term success depends on stable, prosperous societies. This goes back to the very basics of modern business with like Henry Ford, who wanted his workers to be wealthier, who wanted people inside it to be wealthier so they could afford to buy their products. We're not saying they're doing this out of charity. This is just smart business practice. This is why Amazon advocates for, say, like higher minimum wages. There's sort of risk reduction. Executives face personal career risk that consolidation mitigates in smaller firms. Like a single failed product means the company's out, and that means your career has failed. In a larger firm, they're more willing to take risks to try to make things because this doesn't jeopardize their personal financial security and career. What do consumers want? High quality, affordable products that improve their lives. Consumers value seamless experiences, products, and only consolidated firms can create these integrated ecosystems that actually help them. They also want reliability. Consolidated firms invest in redundant systems, quality controls. That means you're going to buy a product that actually works and not something that's going to fail. They also want innovative products, and consolidated firms drive innovation through massive R&D that smaller firms can't match. But I'd like to address just a quick few rebuttals. They say like antitrust laws equals monopoly. This is just like a circular error. This fundamentally misunderstands like there are antitrust investigations into like Volkswagen, BMW, and Mercedes, which are like ruthless competitors in the EU auto market. They also say that like deconsolidated management somehow become more effective. That contradicts every principle of economics. If you break up a firm into 10 smaller firms, each of those needs to set up their own management system, which is going to be less effective. This is like the American dream is entrepreneurship. The American dream is opportunity and prosperity. Consolidated firms create this through higher wages, better benefits, career advance opportunities, and these firms also actually enable innovation through things like the iOS App Store, Google Play, Amazon's marketplace, which means anyone can start a business for much cheaper, which consolidated firms give them. They also say like consumer choice, Instagram Reels versus YouTube Shorts. That's just not true. That's what they're mistaking. Is that's actually competition. When a McDonald's and Burger King offer nearby, that's competition, not lack of choice. They'll say labor rights. That just doesn't make sense. The reason that Amazon and Walmart face unionizing drives is because their scale makes this action viable. A neighborhood restaurant with 10 employees has no union because organizing costs make it economically irrational, and labor law violations occur at higher rates in smaller businesses. For our first substantive, the global competition reality. How would aggressive deconsolidation undermine America's position in the global economy? American firms don't actually operate in a vacuum. They compete in a global marketplace where they're competing against state-backed foreign competitors. For our first neck, international scale requirements. Global markets require massive scale to compete. Scale provides crucial advantages, negotiating leverage, ability to invest. Like, let's look at semiconductor manufacturing. When every single facility, like the base entry costs $20 billion, you just cannot have that without a consolidated firm. Like Taiwan's TSMC, South Korea's Samsung dominate because they have achieved this scale. Breaking up American tech firms, and they would never marshal resources to compete in this industry again. American workers lose high-paying jobs, consumers face higher prices, and foreign quasi-monopolies gain pricing power. First, I can make certain industries, aerospace, pharmaceuticals, AI, have both economic and national security. Deconsolidated American firms lose the scale necessary to maintain technological leadership, allowing foreign competitors to achieve dominant positions that become self-reinforcing. If you had broken up Boeing in the 90s, Europe's Airbus, which is subsidized by the European governments, would have complete dominance commercial manufacturing today. Instead, Boeing's scale allows to remain competitive despite significant government support for its rival. What does this mean? America cedes leadership, strategic interest, not just economic damage, but security vulnerabilities as critical technologies like aerospace move under foreign control. This harms everyone in the United States. For a third, regulatory arbitrage, foreign governments increasingly use regulatory tools to disadvantage American companies. In terms of economic warfare, consolidated firms maintain legal expertise, government relations, payrolls, and financial to challenge discriminatory foreign relations. And what is the interest if we deconsolidate American firms, lose access to these foreign markets, domestic jobs disappear, consumers face fragmented products that reduce functionality. Aggressive deconsolidation would critically weaken America's position in the global economy, seeing leadership in strategic industries, and leaving consumers with fewer choice and higher prices. Before I move on to my second POI, I will take my second point. I'll take a POI from my diagonal. There's one.
Hello. So, if you believe that monopolies are efficient because of their scale, can you explain why that efficiency is more important than the structural violence which they inflict upon their workers' bargaining rights, wages, and their basic dignity, yada yada?
Sorry, could you repeat last?
Can you just explain why the efficiency is more important than the structural violence which they inflict on their workers' bargaining rights, their wages, and their basic dignity and stuff like that?
I'm sorry, I truly cannot hear. I'm very sorry. I'll try to address them later. The innovation engine, why would deconsolidation fundamentally undermine America's innovation capacity? Our second kind of the cross-pollination mechanism here is very crucial. The most valuable innovations emerge from unexpected combination of tech and consolidation. This is how self-driving cars emerge, not from traditional research, but from Google, where mapping researchers, AI engineers, hardware specialists are within the same space. This cross-pollination of expertise from different domains, an entirely new tech category. This is something that deconsolidation would absolutely destroy because it would just recreate these silos. For a second, risk absorption capacity, why this matters, innovation is inherently uncertain. The most promising approaches often fail. Breakthroughs come from unexpected directions. Why this work is large firms can maintain diversified research portfolios, allow them to absorb inevitable failures while capitalizing on unexpected successes. Smaller firms have to bet everything on a single approach, and if that fails, it's over. When developing AI, Google could pursue multiple approaches, and this is why they ultimately succeeded. Deconsolidation would reduce the diversity of research options. For a third ecosystem integration, the most transformation tech doesn't exist in isolation. They create value through integration of complementary products. Consolidated firms can coordinate development across entire product lines. Apple's innovation, they don't invest in the same profit from integrating them into the whole ecosystem, which creates a much larger effect. Deconsolidation will destroy this integration capacity, and consumers disconnect products. What does that mean? Less undermine America's innovation capacity, illuminating firms' ability to absorb researchers and preventing ecosystem integration. This bit isn't about whether we should address anti-competitive behavior. We definitely should, but government's aggressive deconsolidation would destroy the very foundations of American democratic strength. You don't believe some sites how much power the solutions target direct nation, not necessarily just breaking up the entire U.S. economy, which is what their approach would do. Thank you.
I thank Emu for that fine speech, calling our web here.
This Azra going as the government whip. POIs through raise of hands from either team throughout the speech is all right. And I will start in 3, 2, 1. Panel understand that the US is by nature a capitalist society, right? Which means inherently in status quo there exists multiple monopolistic countries with their existing multiple countries who have a larger influence and a larger amount of power, right? Mithun frames this out fairly well. Why then do we think that an aggressive approach is valid and also should be supported insofar that it is extremely beneficial, right? What are the constructives coming from CG? We think that these big companies not being broken up leads to a huge level of monopolistic nature in the economy, right? One, we think by the nature of these companies being big and having more resources in terms of money and power and influence, they have a lot of leeway in order to do whatever they want. They have a lot of influence, right? We think the impact of this is one, it becomes extremely difficult for it becomes extremely easier for smaller companies to be price gouged out of the economy, or for it to be extremely hard for them to enter into the market in the first place, right? Panel note that there exists a lot of entrepreneurial spirit in the economy, right? Which means that the only barrier that exists is a huge level of entry barrier in terms of larger companies just having a lot of benefit in the market, right? This looks like a company like Meta, even though it's technically not a monopoly, they have a lot of power, and this is the thing that consumers choose most to opt into just because of there being a lack of option, right? On opposition, the ability for smaller companies to enter these markets becomes terrible, right? The impact of this is that competition is entirely reduced because the only people existing in the market or who are able to thrive in the market are these big bad companies. This is solved by being able to give them leeways or being able to deconsolidate these companies. Second, this power ties into our second constructive is that the ability of these companies to politically lobby is large, right? This looks like someone like Elon Musk having an undue amount of power in the US government, irrespective of the fact that he's not an elected official, which means that his company is able to politically lobby the government and get a lot of benefits and thrive in the market, which is just not possible for smaller companies. Again, we understand opening opposition is correct in pointing out that monopolies don't exist in every sector, right? But this doesn't necessarily mean that there exists a choice. Mithun comes in and tells you that the choice is somewhat of an illusion, which means that an example such as Alibaba is just not fair. It's just very uncharitable to bring up in this debate because people will still go to Amazon if they mess up. They won't resort to buying from a company like Alibaba because of the fact that Amazon is extremely prominent and extremely big, right? Third, we think that America, being the face of free market, is counterintuitive to its supporting a monopolistic nature in the market, right? Mithun comes in and properly explains to you why it is that the current nature of US economy is that they try to largely have a lot of companies and largely have a lot of entrepreneur and smaller companies come in, right? Which means that only restricting, and this is a natural consequence of these companies having a large undue amount of power, this just poses a threat to these smaller companies. This just poses a threat to these smaller companies being able to enter into the market, right? Which means the idea of it being a free market is totally an illusion. Note panel, the idea coming from OO that employment is worse off on our side is just not entirely correct, right? What happens when companies merge is that redundant sectors of these companies get thrown out, right? Which means that if two big companies are merging, the two different HR sectors existing in both these companies are not still going to be existent. We think then the layoffs are likelier on their side. Even if they are not, Mithun comes in and explains to you why it is that we're willing to bite the bullet on this short-term harm for a long-term increase in employment, right? Note by the nature of a company having an undue amount of power in the market and with regards to things like political influence, they're able to buy out smaller companies and price gouge, which note is possible because of things like economies of scale. What is economies of scale? Easy logic, the bigger the company, the more production it's able to make. The more production is able to make, the lower it's able to the lower price it's able to offer goods, which leads to larger profits. Then they're able to use these larger profits to buy smaller companies and push smaller companies out of the market, right? What then occurs is that poorer employees who have no option but to opt into these jobs because that's the only option that they have to take a minimum wage job just because of the fact that this is the only company offering these jobs, right? Which means that it becomes significantly easier for these companies to go ahead and just do whatever they want and like not ensure labor rights and things like that, because they have no accountability as a result of the fact that they have some amount of influence in the government, right? And general accountability of these companies goes significantly, like reduces significantly the larger they become and the more power that you give them. This third, next, no goods and services are worse off in a monopolistic economy, right? Consumers still opt into the company. Consumers still choose to opt into the company because note what we said about illusion of choice, right? That existing two companies is not choice in and of itself. Opening, yes. Okay, never mind.
Oh, POI. Oh, sorry. You have to prove. You still have to prove why, where deconsolidation is already an aggressive measure, why an aggressive deconsolidation is more important. Where current antitrust laws have already made sure in
Okay,
ensuring
got it.
that
No,
monopolies don't-
antitrust laws have not been working. This is evidently true by seeing companies like Elon Musk getting away with whatever the fuck they want, and there being a lack of accountability, right? These companies are then able to, like, I think we just like easily take over opposition on being able to affect the most vulnerable stakeholders in smaller companies, right? Lastly, on how choice and utility is better off on that by it destroying the free market structure. Choice and utility is highly impacted by, because only free market is able to bring in a large amount of competition, right? Which just doesn't exist on opposition. When in an oligopolistic nature, the only thing that exists is an illusion of choice. Note that the only thing then that we get from closing opposition is that economies of scale exist, right? But this comes at the cost of quality of products, because what happens when a big company exists is that since they're able to offer things for a smaller amount, people, they have no incentive to go ahead and ensure that their goods and services are offered at a good quality, right? Note panel, other than this, closing opposition doesn't have any other extension, right? The rest of their constructive scum is entirely reliant on their opening. With that, I'll end my case. Thank you.
Thanking Gauve for that fine speech. Calling for the final speech of this debate, OpWeb, here you are.
Hi, this is Julia. I'm the second speaker on Op. As a heads up, I use they, them pronouns, but if you forget, it is not the end of the world. Just give me 1 sec to put my notes together, and then I'll begin in a minute. All right, I'll begin in 3, 2, 1. Look, panel, today government faces an uphill battle. Not only are they trying to debate the nature of US firms, the very nature of the market that we're discussing today, but they're also looking at the firms in a vacuum and fail to address the wider global context of an economy and the world we live in today. I'm going to do 3 things for you today, panel. I'm going to address first the metrics and framing that we've heard about on this debate. 2, I'm going to go case by case and discuss the clashes that we've seen. 3, I'm going to rebuild my partner's points, though that will happen throughout the course of my speech. I'll try and flag it for you when I can. As a 4th quick aside, I know that we had some tech issues with POI that my partner took. I'm going to try and cover it now. If you can drop it in the chat, happy to answer then. But I do believe it was vaguely related to labor, which will come up when I talk about CG. So first off, let's talk about the metrics of this debate. 2 main questions have come up through the course of this debate. First, how do we define the nature of a monopoly? Like, what does a monopolistic firm look like? We see examples with Disney, Amazon, Google as these main 3. Opening has done a good job talking about how these aren't fundamentally monopolies, and the kind of back and forth there is one of the big clashes on this debate. It's kind of what top half gets locked into. That kind of brings us to the second metric of our debate. Which of these systems helps the stakeholders of our firm more? And this, by far, is the much more important metric to look at on this debate. Why? And why are we looking specifically at stakeholders? Well, 2 main reasons. First off, they have the most direct impacts. These stakeholders in this scenario are directly, as my partners pointed out, the businesses, which are not inherently monolithic entities. We look at specifically 3 groups of people within these businesses. Those executives, those workers, and the consumers as a whole. My partner already gave you 2 minutes on mechanisms 2 minutes of explanation on what those exactly look like. I'm just going to talk about the impacts because they're the most important. So first off, the most direct impact here is that it fundamentally changes how these firms do business. It changes everything about how these firms are able to operate and able to exist in their day-to-day life. Second, we look at this because it affects more people. It's not just the firm owners or the people that have a controlling stake in the company. It's also about the workers and the consumers themselves as to why they want larger, more consolidation. And so we're breaking down the business because that nuance is essential. My partner's already pointed out why it's better for workers that firms are larger, because it provides them that stability in a global environment. We pointed out that it's better for executives because it helps them be able to steer companies in a way that is successful over the long term. It is better for consumers because they understand what's going on. Now, moving on, I'm going to look at this case by case. First off, we get points from OG that the management of a company is better with specialization, which we agree with as the result, but we don't believe you get there through entrepreneurship like they suggest. We don't believe you get domain-specific work from these smaller companies, frankly, because you just can't. A small startup has maybe 7 employees. A large company could have thousands or hundreds of thousands of employees. At a scale where you're talking about thousands of employees, you're able to have someone specializing in a certain segment of your product, looking at a certain metric. That's like a web designer at Google being able to look specifically at advertising versus when Google was a small startup. They were just trying to make money any way they could. That meant one person was probably the marketing manager, operations manager, tech lead, main developer. That person cannot get nearly as good at their job without getting specialized. Second, that monopolies face issues with supply chains because one organization's problem becomes then everyone's problem. Again, this is a problem that every firm faces, no matter how large or small they are. COVID-19, while they bring it up, is a great example of how it is the opposite and kind of underscores our case. A firm like Amazon was able to respond quickly to the COVID-19 pandemic because they had the capital and resources to respond quickly and throw money at a problem. A small startup shut down and died. We saw that happen in COVID. At this point, I would take a POI from my diagonal if they have one. Barring that, I take a POI from
Sure. Why are you willing to trade off labor rights and things like that that are highly impacted in your world for the bettering of these big companies that don't really need anything?
Yeah, great point. I think that is going to cover that POI that came initially to my partner, so I'll be able to hit both of them at the same time now. We brought up that is actually not how this happens because of operations like collective bargaining. When we have companies with scale, we see that actually workers' rights can be improved, not just one, because the corporation themselves, the executives themselves care about taking care of their workers. As my partner brought up Henry Ford, who famously gave his workers Sunday off specifically so they'd become his consumers. Not only that, but also because these organizations have such scale, you see things like unions becoming wildly and critically successful. Look at the SAG-AFTRA strike against Disney. That only worked because of the massive scale, not just of the company, but also of these striking workers. That balance means that actually workers are going to have better protections overall. That is a huge impact on our side because that means that through the consolidation, we are able to improve the lives of those millions of workers that work for this firm. Firms that have smaller number of employees just don't get that kind of benefit. Going forward, closing talks about that labor point, but also that deconsolidation is better because it'll work in a more modern age. And their argument is that we haven't seen existing trust busting work. I'd like to point out another big movement of economic time, the 1910s, when we saw major trust busting of organizations like U.S. Steel and U.S. Oil. This led to the Great Depression, the worst economic time in the U.S. history to date. Literally, no economic crisis has been more damaging. Additionally, we've seen from the closing government, they talk about accountability with Elon Musk. First off, even if we're going to go with the fact that Tesla is not a monopoly and thus is out of this weighting of this debate, even if we were going to go with Tesla being a monopoly somehow in the car market, Tesla's seeing a record crash in their stock, which is proving that consumers provide the accountability in these sort of environments. If we don't give that power to the government, they're still able to get that. Touching very briefly on opening, how we scale above them. Well, while we agree that they make good points, we make how this matters on a global and systematic level over several different stakeholders. And at its core, that global impact is what matters more. Thank you.
Hello, everyone for this lovely finale. Crossovers, handshakes, all the best